Hello, it's Jason with another episode of Contrabass Conversations, and we have a special guest today, continuing this week talking about the scholarship roadmap from Trevor Jones, my colleague here on the podcast. Trevor is interviewing a former podcast guest, actually, Rob Kassinger of the Chicago Symphony and DePaul University. I actually taught with Rob at DePaul University for many years and actually met Trevor at DePaul. So lots of great memories for me here on this episode. I hope you enjoy it, and definitely check out Trevor's new program at thescholarship.roadmap.com.
Well, I'd like to thank Rob Kassinger for being here today. Rob is a bassist in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and he is professor of double bass at DePaul University School of Music here in Chicago. So, Rob, I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about how you got on the path to, go into music school, and how did that prepare you for your life in music, and then, in a real direct way, and then also indirectly, how did a music degree help you out?
Well, just the basic background. When I was growing up in Boulder, Colorado, the local university, of course, is University of Colorado. And so I was really smitten with the bass from when I was maybe 13. And I really worked very hard with it all through high school. And I had started playing professionally with my father. My mom and dad had a group, and I played in their band, and then I just started working all over the place out there. There weren't that many bass players, and it was a small music scene, but if you were a decent bass player, you would get called. So I started working a lot when I was in high school, and I wanted to go to a big music school back east. That was my big goal, but we thought it'd be a good idea for me to stay in town for maybe just for the bachelor's degree and then go somewhere for master's. So I went to University of Colorado and lived at home for a couple years, and then I decided I really wanted to go back to New York. And I got into Manhattan School of Music. So I transferred there, went to Manhattan School for a couple years to finish up my bachelor's degree. I studied with Homer Mensch, and then went to Juilliard after that for just a year, and got out of New York at that point, and at that point I really wanted to get an orchestra, try to get an orchestra job. And I did a semester at Indiana University with Bransby, who I had been studying with for a couple summers out in Aspen during that time. And then I got my first job in New Orleans, and so I wasn't at IU long enough to really to barely say I went there, but I did have one semester, so I know what the place looks like. So yeah, my school experience, once I got into my experience at University of Colorado was marred by a couple things. The first one was that I was working at least 5 nights a week. And so I was up till all hours of the morning, getting back from gigs down in Denver and other places. And then trying to get up for classes early the next morning. Was not terribly, I wasn't very successful at that. And I was just very distracted, and I didn't really know, I didn't really have much interest in the school. And the school was very, there were a lot of academics and stuff that I was taking, and so I didn't do well at that school. I didn't flourish. I was flourishing in many other ways, but not as a student. Manhattan School was much more, it was kind of perfect for me because it was a conservatory environment. And, so mainly what it was understood that when you go to that school, you're there to practice a lot and then go to some classes and play in your ensembles and take your lessons. But it was all about the practice room, and that was perfect for me. And Juilliard was really the same way. So that part of the school experience that I think going to Manhattan, what was important was when I went to Manhattan, I found the right environment for me, and it wasn't the local college had a fantastic, Colorado had a fantastic music school, but it wasn't really geared towards what I was interested in doing. So I'm glad I found the right fit. I think that was really important for me.
Yeah, so I think a lot of students that are in that position before they go to school, one of the most important things they can do is like really ask themselves, what am I trying to get out of my education? And when you speak about Manhattan and saying this was the perfect fit for me, I'm curious if there are specific questions that you think students who are considering a music degree should be asking themselves.
Yeah, there are definitely some very important questions, and it's hard. It's hard for kids. I was very, very self-motivated, and even though my ideas about specifically what I wanted to do in the future were kind of vague, I had chosen a mode of thinking about the future that the only thing I wanted to do was play music on the bass. And my goal, this is about as specific as it got, was that I wanted to be one of those people that made their living doing nothing but playing the bass. And I didn't know, that left out specifically what I was going to do to accomplish that. And it certainly left out how much money I was expecting to make. That never, ever entered into the picture, which probably worried my parents greatly. But they were musicians, so they knew. It's like nobody should go into the music business to become rich. That's a really...
Yeah, it's a weird reason to enter.
Yeah, it's not. There's many other things.
Yeah,
it's like Don Palma said to me many, many years ago. He said, musicians are generally very intelligent people, very bright people, and if you want to make a lot of money, you certainly have the intellect to go somewhere and get an MBA and start on a career in the business world. And if that's what's really important to you, then absolutely do that. And you've got the mental acuity to make that happen. But if you're, so anyway, that was kind of my outlook on it. And I may be drifting away from the question a little bit, but in my case, the utility of the degree wasn't that important. And anybody who knows me knows that I never got a master's degree. I do have a bachelor's degree, but nothing that I did professionally required that degree. It's just a way of showing that I went to a music school for a certain amount of time. So now that's not always the case. If I had taken the route of wanting to be a professional educator, then of course, you have to have a certain degree. So many places won't even look at you if you don't have a doctorate, So, but that wasn't the path that I wanted to choose. That I chose.
Yeah. So let's say, I remember when you say my goal was I just wanted to play bass to make a living. Mm. That is definitely something when I was in high school. I remember just thinking, well, I don't have too many more specifics for you. I just know I need to be in music. Mm-hmm. We'll figure it out. I don't have a crystal ball. But one of the things that I really focused on both my degrees was finding the teacher that was going to be the right fit. And in some ways, it was strange because, I'm like, oh, yeah, I think I have an idea of what I want. And then you go and you study with somebody, you have a sample lesson or, whatever. And you go, oh man, that was incredible. However, that was totally different than maybe what my preconceived notions were. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if you could speak about what somebody should look for in a teacher. If they only have like a sample lesson, or in a lot of cases, like they don't have, if they don't have an opportunity for that, what should they be looking for?
If you're geared towards performance, if that's what you want to do, you want to find, do some research and find the teachers out there who specialize in performance. And I think another thing to be, aware of is like where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? Do you want to be a jazz player? Are you really just focused exclusively on orchestra? Or is it a mix of both? Or are you just totally into new music? Are you totally into playing solos and just can't imagine doing anything else? That should really that should narrow down your lists of people that you want to check out as teachers. And so there's, if you look around a little bit, there's kind of a short list in the States of teachers who are, the very famous people and who have a good track record, or their students have a good track record of success in whatever fields they go into. But you have to kind of, at least, a lot of high school people don't have a great idea of what they want to do. But if you've got some notion, it's a way to start. So I think you have to, that's the first question. The next thing is that it's just really important that you find somebody who you're comfortable with. You might go and take a lesson with somebody who's just like known as like the top player of anywhere, has the greatest reputation, but you just don't hit it off. And that's the way it goes sometimes. And trust that, that if it doesn't seem like you're getting along, or if there's any kind of strangeness, remember that, because that's just, if in school, in a university studying music, your relationship with your teacher is going to be the most important one you have. And that transcends a fancy name on a school. You can go to a really fancy music school and have a miserable time because you're just not, you're not happy with your teacher, or maybe your teacher's not happy with you, or some or a little of both. So it's important. Find somebody who you're really interested in studying with them, and you get along with them on a personal level, and don't worry so much about the brand name of the school. Usually they kind of go together, but sometimes they don't. And pay attention to that, because that's really, you're gonna be, if you really want to just learn your instrument and how to play music on it, that's where your time is going to be spent.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great points. So flip it now, and if you have a ton of people applying at DePaul, and they're all, getting in touch with you in advance of the audition, you come and hear them on the audition. What are some qualities that you're looking for in them? What are some qualities that if you see that, it's kind of like, ooh, staying away?
Well, the first thing I would say is it makes the best impression on a teacher if you seek them out and come and take a lesson with them. Now, I didn't follow that exactly, but in all my experience, if I see someone and spend an hour or so with them in a lesson, I'm going to remember them when they come back for the audition. It's not a guarantee of getting into the studio or getting some gigantic scholarship or whatever. But the recognition, it's important because it means the students reached out, they they care. They're taking this very seriously. So that's seriousness. Seriousness of intent is very important. Being self-motivated, I honestly, I always think it's a good sign when the student comes for a lesson, or the prospective student comes for a lesson, and the parent drops them off. And this may sound weird or strange, but when the parent comes into the room and sits there and checks out the lesson, it often gives the wrong impression. Like maybe the parent's more interested in this than the kid. And sometimes it indicates that the parent is maybe a little unclear on the teacher-student, music-student setup. The parent's not going to be there when the lessons take place. They're dropping their kid off in college, and this is, at that point, it's the student's life that's going to be playing out. Now, if a parent wants to come and sit in on a lesson, I would never turn them away. And actually, it's come in handy a couple times when actually, I don't know if it came in that handy. I had one kid come in for a lesson. Actually, his parents dropped him off, and then they came in like for the last 15 minutes. And then the dad, who was in the business world, obviously, he started asking me all sorts of questions about, well, how is he going to get a job after school, or out of school? Is there, what do you do? Do you have like a job fair, kind of a job fair day or something? I was like, oh boy. I really had to go back to square one and explain, auditions and the crapshoot that is. And his dad was not happy coming out of that lesson. He was really, but he had no idea. So sometimes that's sometimes the case when a parent comes in, and they start asking questions instead of the kid, and the questions aren't really realistic. They're sort of uninformed. I just wish parents would really jump in and take it as seriously as far as knowing what the kid's getting into, and then let the kid do what they're going to do. And also, I think the students tend to play better when it's just one-on-one. I think I sort of went circuitous around this question, but I think what I'm looking for is that seriousness, and of course talent. You've got to have natural ability, a lot of natural ability, and you have to have a work ethic that matches, if not exceeds, that natural talent. And that's a little more, that's a harder thing to ascertain in a single lesson, because the student is ostensibly showing up with the best that same thing with auditions, that's the best that they're going to play based on their preparation. That's the sum total of all the work that they've done. So if it sounds really good, most of the time that means, that there's a good talent and work ethic combination there. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the work ethic isn't quite there. Talent, you can kind of gauge that pretty quickly. So I guess part two, what did I say? Seriousness, and then the talent, musicality thing. And then the third thing is sincerity. I don't like students coming in, or anybody really, who's coming in trying to tell me something of what they're going to do. It's not terribly sincere when let your playing do the talking for you. You can't fake that. When you pick up an instrument and play, what comes out is exactly what you've been putting into it, and there's nothing that it's absolutely sincere, right? you always play to that level that you've acquired or accomplished. That tells me what's going on. But every now and then you get a youngster who comes in and just starts like saying, "Oh, I did this and I did that, and then I'm going to do this," and that's sometimes a little worrisome.
But that you brought up the idea about parental involvement. I think I forget where I heard this, but one of the best pieces of advice for parents post-audition is to just not even ask how did it go? It's like, don't ask how anything went, just take them out, get a nice meal afterwards, and let them bring it up in their own way. And it might not be until tomorrow, but it is such a highly personal relationship between a student and a teacher, and best just to leave it between those two parties. Yeah. And if you're asked in, of course, that's different.
Yeah. But I mean, if it was a really negative experience, I would want the parent should know, at least at some point, boy, I really didn't like that teacher at all. Ugh, something like that. It takes a while to kind of put it together, the experience you had. And sometimes it's just totally positive and, the kid's like really excited. That's probably the best result. But it's good a way to look at it for the parent.
So a lot of what you mentioned with a student, I find it to fall into the category of you have to be able to self-assess to a certain degree. It doesn't have to be flawless and perfect. I mean, God knows that doesn't happen for our entire lives. But are there questions that a student can ask themselves, before this? I want to study with Rob Kassinger at DePaul University School of Music. Am I should I even be doing this? What are the questions a student can ask themselves? Or is it better just to start taking actions?
You have to make some kind of assessment always of where you are. And, it's like when, inventory, you have to find out what's selling and what's not, and you have to get rid of what's not. And you can't keep things around. So if you've got some work habits that have some really, it's not working for you, you have to be honest and I guess sincere about it. It's like, I sincerely want to succeed, and it would be great to study with teacher X or, Y or whatever, but do I have what it takes to play really well in an audition, no matter who it's for? I would say that's the question you got to ask, because an audition is just a performance. It's a very important performance, but if you're in it for the long haul, it's just one of a string of countless performances, right? And each performance is just a snapshot of where you are right in that moment as a player. Every time you pick up the instrument, it's a snapshot. If I picked up some electric bass over here and tried to play some complicated lick that I haven't played for 10 years, I'd make a pretty quick assessment. Well, I'm not, that ain't making it. I got to do a lot of practice if I want to play that. That's a clear, sincere assessment. So I wouldn't necessarily attach it to a specific person or a specific school or anything like that. The pursuit is just, I want to be able to turn in the best possible performance that I can when that comes up. And how do I get to that? Am I doing everything my current teacher wants me to do? Am I playing in master classes for people when the occasion comes up? How much time per day am I practicing, and how effective is that? Is this central to my life, or are there other things that really interest me? And the answer to that question, again, be sincere about it. If music isn't like 100% of what you're into, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But be honest about that. Because when you get up in an audition situation, This is something I got from Stuart Sankey. He said, every hour you don't practice, somebody else is. So when you go into an audition, you've worked as hard as you can, but you also have to consider that there's probably somebody in any given situation who's worked harder than you have. So if that doesn't inspire you to really kick things up a notch, then maybe this isn't the thing that you should be pursuing for your life's journey. So yeah, I think that's the best way I could put it. I want to know specifically what's it going to take to get into Mr. Jones's studio. I want to get into Trevor's studio over here. You might want to try to find some people who currently study with him or have studied with him and just get a feel from them. Like, what should I do? What is he looking for? That can be very helpful. Do investigating.
Absolutely. So I want to talk specifically now about audition day. Have you ever been in a situation where you have heard someone play, but you haven't met them? And, you're trying to make a decision about somebody down the line. You have X amount of spots you're going to fill in the studio. This many people audition for it. I've got to pick a number. It's going to be four of these folks that auditioned. Is there anything outside of their performance that is going to influence whether or not, they're going to get accepted? And this is assuming that you haven't already had a one-on-one situation with them.
Yeah, without the one-on-one, you're relying on certainly what you just heard, but you're also maybe going by what's the vibe? Does this person seem serious? Do they appear that they're taking this audition seriously? I don't get too wrapped up in what people are wearing or what their hair looks like or whatever. I really don't. But if it looks like somebody really just wandered in off the street, most of the time their playing reflects that.
Sure.
They're usually not exclusive. But every now and then you have somebody walk in who just looks like $1 million, shirt's like starched and the tie's perfect and everything is just right, and then they start playing and it's like, oh boy, they're not quite. But just the opposite I've had happen before, where the guy looks like maybe he slept in his car the night before, but he comes in and he just plays incredible. So I always try to bring it back to the playing, but with anything else, it's an interview, so you want to present yourself. That you want to give the impression that you really give a damn about what you're doing.
What are the most common mistakes that you see in an audition?
When you come into the room, it's good to appear that you have thought through every part of this, including when you come into the room and you're getting set up. You don't want to make people wait because there's 2 sheets of music out in the hall that you forgot, and you also forgot to bring in your rock stop or your stool. If things get complicated and kind of scattered in the getting you set up to play, that can leave kind of a not so good impression. I always like to say, come in just ready to, you just sit down or stand there and start playing. Be friendly, say hello, put on a good face, even if you're a little nervous. But try not to come in and make, a bunch of clattering noise and then have to leave and then come back. And, that's not good. That's really frustrating in professional auditions too. Just sitting there forever while someone's obviously setting up their stool, and then I've actually heard people go take a big drink of water and then big pauses after that, and it's like, come on, let's play some music for me.
Sure. also speaks to the idea of just logistically being prepared. And, I know if I hear an audition and someone comes in and does that, I'm like, is this going to be every lesson? Are they going to be a little late? Are they going to show up without their end pin or whatever? It just, signaling, if you say, well, how do you want the professor to feel about you after your interaction? Oh, I want them to love me. I want them to give me that full scholarship to the school. Cool. All right. Well, what do you need to do to ensure that happens?
Yeah.
Don't forget your end pin.
Yeah. Just check before you go through the door. That's a good idea. Check your end pins there. Have all of your music bound in one book. Don't come in with a big stack of books under your arm. Come in with one book where everything's printed and you can just flip your pages. This may be a little too obvious, but it never hurts. Check that you're in tune before you go in the room. Don't sit there and that's a non-starter. If the guy or gal comes in and their bass is just wildly out of tune, it's like, well, what have you been doing in the minutes before you came in? That's kind of scary.
Yeah,
and then if it takes a long time to tune, that's not a good sign either. Just come in just good to go.
Yeah. So many times, like the most practical advice, you get it and you go, oh, really? That's it? I just need to come and sit down and play and be ready. Nice.
Yeah.
No, this
Don't
is
make
great.
it too complicated. It's.
So let's finish up with auditions. If there's a student, let's say, who's going into undergrad and they just simply haven't had many audition experiences, what is one piece of advice that you could offer to make auditioning feel more comfortable?
Just treat it like it's a short recital performance. And in the maybe 2 weeks before the actual audition, you really should have everything in performance shape. You shouldn't be learning licks the night before or, God forbid, the morning of the audition. You should make it your goal that a week before the performance, you got everything good to go. And at that point, you should just be playing through your repertoire as if it were a performance. And I would say a minimum 3 times a day, especially because these audition lists are material is pretty short. So it's not a huge burden to say at least 3 times a day. Play your performance. Play it for whoever's willing to listen, mom, dad, whatever. If you've got some sort of large I was going to say a large hall or something that you can access, that's also a good idea to get comfortable with playing in a large space. If you're going to be on a stage and like an auditorium at a school, if you haven't played bass alone on an auditorium stage, that can be really unnerving. So you have to be kind of organized about that. If you have a church nearby that you could get into to play some stuff, or play for your friends. Try not to just do all of your playing in the room where you practice, which is sometimes it's a small bedroom or something. Try to get yourself out of that comfort zone, and get accustomed to playing, especially in a big room. It's a lot easier to be practicing in a big room and then play your audition in a smaller space. But you go the opposite direction, it's very hard, and you got to keep your focus.
I love that you brought up, it's, in the sense of playing mock auditions, and it's never underestimate your audience. You get nervous in front of family members. It's a different type of nerves maybe than somebody else, but just essentially playing in a lot of different settings.
Yep.
Yeah.
One other thing that's it's interesting in this whole COVID quarantine environment, all of the lessons that I've taught, and I'm sure you're in the same boat, have been online, and the students have been playing in front of a microphone. And you get a lot better at doing that if you're doing that once a week, but man, if you do that every day, you get really good at it, and to the point where it doesn't really faze you anymore. I'm hoping that's something that my students can really carry forward coming out of this, because as I learned from Bruce Bransby at IU, recording yourself is the ultimate way to teach yourself. And it's really unnerving when you first start doing it. And it's not effective if you just, like, every month or so get out the microphone and record yourself. If you do it every day, not even necessarily to play it back and listen that day, just record. Get accustomed to recording. Get accustomed to just having a microphone in front of you. And it really helps with your kind of performance chops. You don't get as affected by the idea.
It really does just force your hand to consider it is a performance. That's what it is. There's no going back. It's strange sometimes too how other styles of music, and Rob, you've done plenty of recording sessions. There's that certain feeling when you know somebody's hitting record and everybody's on the clock. I gotta get this right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a different vibe. But you can improve your ability to perform under that kind of pressure, and it totally helps live performance. And it's certainly the best way to really figure out, I see why that certain technique isn't working, because my finger was over here when it should have been here. All those things that you can't see when you're playing, and you can't notice when you're in the moment of playing.
Absolutely. Well, I want to finish with one more question. And what would you say to a student who is thinking, well, man, I guess my plan all along was to go into music school. Now that COVID has entered the equation, I'm curious if I should just soldier on and do these, keep preparing for these auditions, continue on, or should I take a pause and see what happens? And that ties into with how's the education experience been from your end teaching online? Other than wearing slippers, of course, which is honestly the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, I agree. There are some distinct advantages of teaching in your home space with, As a teacher, I took to it pretty easily. I'm kind of a gearhead, I like electronic equipment and setting things up and figuring things out. That to me was actually kind of a fun byproduct of all this, was that I really was able to, and I had plenty of time on my hands to set up the studio and find ways that everything works really well. For some people, that's really frustrating and they don't want to deal with it. But I'm glad I learned how to do that, to do the online teaching. Because now, earlier today I had a lesson with a guy in Sweden, which was really cool.
Yeah.
So this is another aspect of my teaching that I can take forward. As far as, it's a really difficult time for people in the student years, and I'm not sure I have any great words of advice, except if you can keep in mind that at some point we're going to get back to normal. I sincerely believe that. If we're in a lockdown kind of environment and you're really serious about playing music, and most people who went into music did it because they just simply can't imagine doing anything else. That's certainly the case with me. I'm sure with you as well. I didn't have a pandemic when I was a young person, and I'm pretty sure that if I did, I would have used that time to practice, and I would have put the time to good use. So don't waste this time. Try to focus on what you can do right now with today. We all have long-term goals and maybe shorter-term goals, but the real goal is like, what am I going to do today to accomplish something as a musician? That might mean I played this passage a little bit faster than yesterday, or just find something to achieve. You always want to achieve something. It's hard to do that when you're not thinking in the just right now. Just think about right now. And at some point, you don't want to come through this whole time and look back on it later and say, like, man, I really could have. I mean, look at all that time I could have used to. Music is a competitive, extremely competitive field from the music business side of things. It is not a good field to go into if you just want to sort of loaf around. The world will pass you by if you close your eyes for 10 minutes. If you decide that, well, maybe I'm not going to do it right now, I'll wait and see how this whole thing shakes out. It's just like going back to that quote from Stuart Sankey. It's like, well, somebody else is utilizing this time to some great advantage, and you're going to meet up with that person in some kind of circumstance somewhere down the road. And if you both want the same thing, that person's probably going to get it. So don't waste time. That's the thing I always say to my students. I wish I could give you great technique. I wish I could give you perfect intonation. I wish blah, 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 blah. I could go through all that. But what it really boils down to is if I could give my students anything, I wish I could give them time. I'd love to give everybody an extra 5 years. Just from here to there, you have 5 years to work on everything that you need to work on. But you can't do that. You have to work with what you've got. And if all you have is the next 10 minutes, get busy.
That's the best possible way to finish. Get busy. Rob Kassinger from Chicago Symphony Orchestra and DePaul University School of Music. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Anytime. Come and see us at DePaul sometime.